The trial begins. Ilara stood at the center of the grand courtroom, her hands bound in metallic cuffs that chafed against her skin. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, the weight of countless eyes upon her. She could feel the intensity of the alien spectators, their glowing eyes fixed on her, as if she were some kind of specimen under examination. The seats were filled with high-ranking officials and ambassadors from across the galaxy, all watching as the tribunal, the governing body of Orveth, prepared to pass judgment on one of their prisoners. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, and she struggled to keep her composure. Her entire future was at stake, and there was no one to speak for her, no one to defend her against the accusations that had been levied against her. Ilara, human from Earth, you stand accused of espionage against the Orvathian people, boomed Zovik, the tribunal's lead judge. His voice reverberated through the grand chamber, sounding more like a declaration than a question. The metallic clang of his gavel sent a chill down her spine as it struck against the stone podium. Do you have any defense to offer? Her throat felt dry, and for a moment, Ilara considered staying silent. It seemed hopeless. How could she defend herself against charges that were built on lies? She had never betrayed Orveth. She had only been working as an engineer for a peaceful interplanetary trade agreement. But the evidence against her was fabricated. A false report had linked her to a sabotage attempt on Orvathian equipment. Yet, in this courtroom, the truth meant little when power was involved. Taking a deep breath, Ilara lifted her head, her eyes meeting the cold, emotionless gaze of Zovik. I didn't do this. I've been framed. A murmur ran through the crowd, but it was drowned out by Joran's voice, sharp and cutting as he stood to present his case. The evidence is irrefutable, he said, his voice laced with contempt. We have footage of Ilara tampering with Orvathian defense systems, and her communications were intercepted with known enemies of the tribunal. Her actions jeopardized the security of our world. Her death is the only way to maintain order. Ilara's heart sank. She had been framed, but it was no use. The prosecutor had made his case, and it seemed clear that nothing she could say would sway the tribunal. Kara, a fellow human prisoner sitting in a holding cell behind Ilara, whispered words of encouragement. You're not alone in this. There are others who know the truth. Ilara felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, but quickly pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to get distracted now. Do you wish to speak any further before sentencing, Ilara? Zovik's voice was like ice. Ilara could barely choke out the words. I didn't do it. I was set up. Please, you have to believe me. But her pleas seemed to have no effect. The tribunal was not interested in her innocence. The charge was too serious, and the consequences of backing down were too great. Joran looked at her with a sense of finality, his eyes cold as he spoke. Her guilt is undeniable. I recommend the maximum penalty. Execution. A wave of shock rippled through the audience, but there were no objections. The tribunal had made its decision. The sentence was sealed. Zovik lifted his gavel, signaling the end of the trial. Ilara's legs gave way beneath her, and she fell to her knees, her body trembling. This was it. She had no future now. The tribunal had spoken. A mysterious ally. Ilara's heart was still racing as she was escorted through the narrow, cold corridors of the tribunal building. She could hear the faint murmurs of the alien guards around her, their words unintelligible in their native tongue. But their cold glares spoke volumes. No one seemed to care about her fate, except for one person, and that person was someone she least expected. She was thrown into a small, dimly lit holding cell, the harsh metallic doors slamming shut behind her. The walls of the cell were bare, and the air was thick with the sterile smell of antiseptic. Ilara sat against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees. She had been through so much in such a short time, but the worst was still yet to come. The tribunal's executioners. Her thoughts raced as she tried to think of a way out. She knew she hadn't committed the crime, but the evidence against her had been so meticulously fabricated that she could do nothing to fight back. As she sat there in the silence of her cell, a strange sense of hopelessness began to wash over her. But just as she was beginning to surrender to despair, the door to her cell slid open. A figure entered, cloaked in shadow. She looked up, startled, her heart pounding once again. But this time it wasn't fear that gripped her. Instead, it was curiosity. The figure stepped into the dim light, revealing a tall alien woman with sleek black skin, adorned with shimmering silver patterns that seemed to shift as she moved. Her hair, long and flowing, was a mix of dark green and violet, cascading down her back like an elegant waterfall. The woman's eyes were a piercing shade of gold, but there was a warmth in them, an understanding that Ilara had never seen before in any of her captors. "Who are you?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a step closer, her gaze scanning the room as if she were checking for hidden threats. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft yet firm, carrying a tone of quiet authority. "I am Vinara," the alien said, "and I'm here to help you." Ilara's mind raced. Help? How could this stranger help her? After all, everyone around her, from the cold judge to the relentless prosecutor, seemed determined to see her executed. Vinara stepped closer still, now standing just a few feet away from the young human. "I know you've been wronged," she continued, her voice steady. "But you need to listen carefully, Ilara. Your situation is not as hopeless as it seems." Ilara blinked, trying to absorb the gravity of the situation. How could this woman possibly know her name? And what did she mean by saying her situation wasn't hopeless? "How do you know who I am?" Ilara asked cautiously. "Why would you want to help me?" Vinara smiled, a rare and enigmatic expression. "Because, like you, I've been a prisoner of the tribunal. They have a way of turning people into pawns, stripping them of their dignity and their freedom." Her gaze softened as she looked at Ilara, the hint of something deeper, maybe sympathy or understanding, lingering in her eyes. Ilara's mind raced. Was she being set up? Or was this an ally, someone who truly cared about her survival? The thought of someone actually wanting to help her, after everything that had happened, seemed almost too good to be true. But then, she remembered Kara's whispered words earlier during the trial. There are others who know the truth. Before Ilara could voice her thoughts, Vinara spoke again. "I'm here to offer you a chance. The tribunal has sentenced you to death, but there is a way to escape that fate." Ilara's eyes widened. "Escape? How?" Vinara nodded slowly. "There is a rebellion forming within the ranks of the tribunal. They're tired of the corruption, the lies, and the bloodshed. I've been in contact with them for months. But we need someone like you to help us take the first step. If you agree to help us, we can get you out of here. We can expose the truth." Ilara's heart raced again, but this time it wasn't from fear. Hope stirred in her chest, hope that she might survive this ordeal after all. But the next words that left her mouth were full of hesitation. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vinara didn't immediately answer. Instead, she took a step back and looked Ilara over, as if weighing the situation. "What we need," she said finally, "is a key." "A key?" Ilara echoed. "What kind of key?" Vinara's golden eyes gleamed in the dim light of the cell. "A key that can unlock a much bigger plan, one that will bring the tribunal to its knees. You see, there is a device, an ancient piece of technology, something that predates even the tribunal itself. It's been hidden for centuries, and only a select few know of its existence." Ilara's mind raced. This was all too much to process, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the chance that was being presented to her. "You want me to help you find this device?" Ilara asked, trying to make sense of the situation. "Exactly," Vinara replied, her gaze unwavering. "You were framed because the tribunal fears this device. They know that if it falls into the wrong hands, their control over Orvath and the entire galaxy will be shattered." Ilara was silent for a long moment as she processed the information. She had heard rumors about the tribunal's darker dealings, their thirst for power, and the lengths they would go to in order to maintain that power. The idea that they were hiding something like an ancient device made sense, and it only added to her determination to find a way out of this nightmare. "What do I need to do?" Ilara asked, her voice firm now. "Tell me how I can help." Venera nodded. "First, you need to stay alive. They'll try to move you to the execution chamber soon, but if we act quickly, we can break you out before they have the chance." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Could this actually work? "You'll be moved soon," Venera said, stepping toward the door. "We'll have to act fast. Trust me, Ilara. If you want to live, this is the only way." With that, Venera turned and left the cell, leaving Ilara alone once again. But this time, she wasn't just awaiting her fate. She was ready to fight. The escape plan. The cold, sterile walls of the holding cell no longer felt as oppressive as they once had. Ilara's mind was racing, her pulse quickening as the weight of what Venera had just revealed began to sink in. The chance to escape, to expose the tribunal for their lies and corruption. It was almost too much to process. Yet, a part of her couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose returning. She wasn't just some pawn in the tribunal's twisted games anymore. She had a role to play in something bigger, something that could change everything. Her fingers brushed the smooth surface of the cold floor as she stood up, pacing back and forth in the small confines of the cell. She had to stay focused. Venera had promised her a way out, but she knew nothing was certain. The tribunal had a way of making people disappear, and the execution chamber was where most prisoners met their untimely end. Ilara's thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a series of muffled footsteps echoing down the hallway outside her cell. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. She quickly darted to the door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. There was a low murmur, the sound of voices conversing in hushed tones. Then, a heavy silence. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as the sound of footsteps grew louder. She stepped back instinctively, her eyes scanning the dimly lit space for any signs of movement. A flash of green appeared outside the door, and before Ilara could react, the door slid open, revealing a pair of guards. They stood motionless for a moment, as if waiting for something. The taller of the two guards finally spoke, his voice low and emotionless. "Your time has come, human," he said, his words laced with disdain. "You're being moved to the execution chamber." Ilara's heart hammered in her chest. She knew this was the moment when everything would be decided. She had no idea if Venera would come through, or if the rebellion would be able to help her. But she had no choice but to trust them. "Now," the guard continued, gesturing for her to step forward. "Move quickly." With a deep breath, Ilara steadied herself and complied, walking toward the doorway with her hands still bound in restraints. The guards flanked her, one on either side. Her legs felt weak beneath her, but she refused to show any sign of fear. She had a plan now. She wasn't going to let them break her. As they walked down the corridor, Ilara stole a quick glance at the guards. Their faces were stern and unreadable, but the thought that she might be just another nameless prisoner in their eyes made her blood boil. They had no idea what was about to happen. "Where are you taking me?" Ilara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The shorter guard snorted, clearly annoyed by her question. "To your death, of course. What else do you think the tribunal has planned for you?" Ilara kept her gaze fixed forward, though her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She could feel the tension in the air as they walked deeper into the heart of the tribunal's fortress. The walls seemed to grow thicker, the shadows darker. She could hear the distant sounds of machinery humming, the faintest hint of voices behind closed doors. It felt as if the entire building was alive, and the further they went, the closer they got to the tribunal's inner sanctum, the execution chamber. Just as Ilara thought she might lose her composure, the sound of a faint whistle reached her ears, a soft, melodic tune that carried through the air like a signal. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. That was the signal she'd been waiting for. Venera had come through. The guards didn't seem to notice the change in the atmosphere, too focused on their task. But Ilara felt a surge of energy building within her. This was it. She had to make her move. The hallway twisted and turned, and then they arrived at the large metal door leading to the execution chamber. The guards moved to unlock it, their hands clanging against the cold metal as they fumbled with the keycard. Ilara took a slow, steady breath, preparing herself. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the hall, followed by the unmistakable sound of energy weapons firing. The guards froze, their eyes widening in confusion. Ilara's pulse raced as she seized the opportunity. In one swift motion, she pulled herself to the side, twisting her body to avoid the guards' attention. She ducked into a nearby alcove, hidden from view. The guards were distracted by the noise. Now was her chance. Venera appeared in the doorway, just as the guards turned toward the commotion, her silver-patterned suit shimmering in the dim light. She didn't waste a second. "Move now," she shouted. Ilara didn't need to be told twice. She bolted from the alcove, her legs pumping as she sprinted toward Venera. The alien woman's hand shot out, gripping her arm firmly, and together they dashed down the hallway. The chaos around them intensified, voices shouting, alarms blaring. But they kept running. "Where are we going?" Ilara gasped, struggling to keep up with Venera's rapid pace. "To the underground tunnels," Venera replied quickly, her voice calm amidst the frenzy. "It's the only way out of here. We can't risk being caught." They turned a corner, and before Ilara could ask another question, they reached a hidden door embedded in the wall. Venera pressed a sequence of symbols on the panel, and the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. "Get in," Venera urged, pulling Ilara forward. With a final glance back toward the chaos unfolding in the hallway, Ilara stepped into the darkness of the tunnel. The door slid shut behind them, cutting off the noise and the chaos. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ilara allowed herself a breath of relief. But she knew the battle wasn't over. The real fight was just beginning. The underground resistance. The darkness of the tunnel enveloped Ilara and Venera as they moved deeper into the labyrinth beneath the tribunal's fortress. The low hum of distant machinery and the faint vibrations beneath their feet were the only sounds to accompany them. They kept moving, the urgency of the moment pushing them forward. Ilara's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had been a prisoner just moments ago, sentenced to death for a crime she hadn't committed. Now she was on the run, heading toward an unknown destination with a woman she barely knew. She didn't fully understand Venera's motives or what had driven her to help. But right now, she had no choice but to trust her. Venera glanced over at Ilara, her sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. "We're almost there," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the danger that loomed. "The underground network is just ahead." Ilara nodded, her mind still spinning. What is this place? Where are we going? Venera didn't slow down as they continued their hurried pace. It's a resistance cell, a group of rebels who have been fighting against the tribunal for years. They can help us. A cold shiver ran down Ilara's spine. Rebels. The thought of joining forces with people who openly defied the tribunal was both exhilarating and terrifying. The tribunal was an all-powerful organization, one that controlled nearly every aspect of life on their planet. Defying them was not something to be taken lightly. But as she thought of her imminent execution, of the cold metal walls of the holding cell, she knew she had no choice. If this was her chance at survival, she had to take it. They reached a large steel door embedded into the tunnel's far wall. Venera quickly pressed a series of symbols into a panel, and with a soft hiss, the door slid open, revealing the dimly lit room beyond. Inside, there were several figures moving about, speaking in hushed tones. As soon as they entered, the door shut behind them, sealing them off from the chaos above. The room was small, but it was clearly a safe house, a sanctuary from the tribunal's watchful eye. There were computers set up along the walls, with maps and blueprints scattered across the tables. Several people were seated around, either monitoring the systems or deep in conversation. They all looked up as Ilara and Venera entered, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. Venera wasted no time. "This is Ilara. She's the one I told you about." A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward, his gaze piercing but not unkind. He had the look of someone who had seen countless battles, his worn leather armor and weathered features betraying years of experience. "I'm Jaren," he said, his voice low and authoritative. "We've been watching you, Ilara. The Tribunal's plans have been in motion for a long time. We can't afford to let them succeed." Ilara nodded, her mind still reeling from the events of the last few hours. "What are you talking about? What's the Tribunal planning?" Jaren's expression darkened. "They've been consolidating power, increasing their control over the system. But they've been hiding something. A weapon, a secret that could change the course of everything." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. A weapon? What kind of weapon could they be hiding? "What kind of weapon?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Venera stepped forward, her face serious. "The Tribunal has been experimenting with something. They found a way to control the minds of the population. They'd been using it on the people, manipulating them, turning them into slaves for their cause. But this weapon, the one they've been hiding, could turn the tide in our favor. It's not just a weapon. It's a key to breaking their control." Ilara's mind was spinning. A mind control weapon. It sounded like something out of a nightmare. But the way Venera spoke, the conviction in her voice, it made Ilara believe that this was real, that it was their only chance to stop the Tribunal. "What do we need to do?" Ilara asked, determination flooding her chest. If she was going to be part of this rebellion, she had to know how she could help. Jaren exchanged a glance with Venera before turning back to Ilara. "We need to find the location of the weapon. We have a source who might know where it is hidden, but we need to get to them before the Tribunal does. They'd been trying to silence everyone with knowledge of it." Venera stepped forward, placing a hand on Ilara's shoulder. "You're in this now, and I'm not letting you go back to that prison." Ilara didn't hesitate. "I'm with you. Let's stop the Tribunal." Jaren gave a nod of approval. "Good. We leave in an hour. Get ready." As Ilara looked around the room at the rebels, each one of them scared in their own way, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She had a purpose, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she had a chance to make a difference. She glanced at Venera, who met her gaze with a knowing smile. This is just the beginning. The feeling in Ilara's chest was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Fear, yes, but also something else. Hope. Hope that she could make a difference. Hope that the Tribunal's reign of terror would finally come to an end. She was no longer just a pawn in their game. She was a player. And she was ready to fight. The final stand. The rebel hideout was bustling with activity as Ilara and Venera prepared for the mission. The walls, lined with maps and schematics, were a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation. Every rebel in the room knew that the fate of their world rested on the success of this mission. Ilara had just finished donning a set of tactical armor provided by the rebels. It was lightweight but durable, designed for stealth and mobility. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to focus on the task at hand. The mission was simple in theory: infiltrate the Tribunal's research facility, retrieve the location of the mind control weapon, and escape undetected. But Ilara knew that nothing about this mission would be simple. Venera appeared at her side, fully equipped for the operation. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced with a sharp intensity. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Ilara gave a firm nod. "As ready as I'll ever be." Jaren approached them, holding a small device in his hand. It was a communicator, designed to keep them in contact with the rebel base throughout the mission. "This will allow us to track your progress," he said. "We'll be monitoring your every move." Ilara nodded, taking the device from him. She felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. If anything went wrong, it wouldn't just be her life at stake. It would be the lives of everyone fighting for freedom. Venera placed a hand on Ilara's shoulder, her eyes filled with unspoken understanding. We're not just doing this for us. We're doing this for everyone who's ever suffered under the tribunal's rule. Ilara looked at her, determination hardening in her chest. Let's make sure their suffering ends. With that, the team set out. They traveled under the cover of darkness, moving swiftly through the underground tunnels. The rebel base had provided them with a series of encrypted maps that led them to the heart of the tribunal's fortress, a place heavily guarded and nearly impossible to infiltrate. But the rebels had a plan. They knew every inch of the facility, every weak point in the security system. Ilara and Venera had been briefed on the layout in detail. Their goal was clear: slip past the guards, access the secure database in the facility's core, and retrieve the coordinates of the weapon's hidden location. As they approached the facility, Ilara could feel the tension building. The night was thick with the sounds of distant machinery, the hum of generators, and the occasional footsteps of guards patrolling the area. Venera led the way, her movements fluid and silent. Ilara followed closely behind, doing her best to keep pace. They reached a narrow access point, an old maintenance tunnel hidden behind a series of metal panels. Venera quickly worked her way through the door, bypassing the security lock with a set of tools. The door opened with a soft click, and they slipped inside. The tunnel was dark, but the faint glow of emergency lights illuminated their path. Ilara kept her breathing steady, trying to remain as silent as possible. Every sound felt amplified in the silence of the tunnel. She couldn't help but feel the weight of their mission bearing down on her. If they were caught, it would mean the end, not just for her, but for the entire rebellion. They moved quickly but cautiously, avoiding the security cameras and the occasional patrolling guard. Venera led the way, her sharp instincts guiding them through the labyrinthine corridors. They reached the heart of the facility, where the central database was located. It was heavily guarded, surrounded by reinforced walls and security checkpoints. Venera motioned for Ilara to stay back as she carefully approached the security panel. Her fingers danced across the keypad, inputting a series of codes she had memorized. After a tense moment, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was filled with rows of computers, each one connected to the central network. The information they needed was buried deep within the system, protected by layers of encryption and firewalls. Ilara's heart raced as she took a seat at one of the terminals. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind working at lightning speed. She had been trained in hacking and data retrieval during her time with the Resistance, but this was different. This wasn't just about stealing information, it was about saving her world. "Come on," she muttered under her breath as she worked her way through the security protocols. Venera stood watch, her eyes darting between the door and Ilara as she typed. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Ilara's fingers were moving faster than ever, bypassing firewalls and decrypting files. She could feel the sweat trickling down her brow, her nerves on edge as the countdown in her head ticked closer to danger. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the terminal beeped, signaling the success of her mission. The location of the mind control weapon flashed on the screen, coordinates to a remote facility on a distant planet, hidden in plain sight. "We've got it," Ilara said, her voice shaking with a mix of relief and excitement. Venera didn't wait for a second longer. "Let's move." They hurried out of the room, retracing their steps through the facility. But as they neared the exit, they were met with the sound of alarms blaring. The security system had detected their breach. Venera cursed under her breath. "We don't have much time. Get to the extraction point." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The escape route was just ahead, but it was heavily guarded. The odds were against them. But there was no turning back now. With one final burst of speed, they sprinted down the corridor, weaving between guards and avoiding the fire from their weapons. Ilara's mind raced. She could feel the heat of the pursuit on her heels. Every step felt like it might be their last. Finally, they reached the extraction point, a hidden elevator that would take them to the surface. Venera quickly punched in the override code, and the doors slid open. Inside, they collapsed against the walls, breathing heavily. The elevator began its ascent, carrying them to safety. "We did it," Ilara said, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration in her voice. Venera nodded, her face grim but satisfied. "This is just the beginning." The doors opened to the darkened sky above, the sound of the city below still humming with life. They were safe, for now. As Ilara looked out at the city, she knew that this was only the first step in the fight to take down the tribunal. The weapon was out there, and now they had the information they needed to find it. But the war was far from over, and Ilara was ready for the next battle.